I think we're waiting for one council member and also for the YouTube Connect. In the meantime, we can do some batting practice. We can just take one of the bats off the wall behind Nick and slap him with it, and nothing will happen to his head because it's a green screen item. I don't know.
It is. I'm going to you see now I'm going to change my background again.
Looks like we're live on YouTube.
Yeah, Colin just said we're live on YouTube.
Yeah.
All right. So I think what we're going to do is start up. We're right at 7 or it's 7:04. All right. So, you know, I actually have a gavel. Look at that. Right. So I'm going to hold this up and do this, and we're going to start. We need to do a Pledge of Allegiance. So,
Isn't this workshop? We don't do workshop.
Oh, this is a workshop, right? Yes, you're right. We don't have to do a pledge. Thank you. All right, welcome everybody. We're at undisclosed locations, each of us. I was trying to be in the courtroom, but it turns out that's easier for me to be away from the courtroom because we've got a screen in there that we're putting onto YouTube. And I think that's what they're seeing on YouTube is whatever that screen is. Is that right, Colin? Maybe.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so I got Anthony. Let's go through, since we're not all in the same place, let's just identify who's here. So the mayor is here. I see George Mansfield, you're there, right?
I'm here.
I see Amber Grant somewhere. If you just,
Here.
there you go. I see to make a quorum. Who else are we looking for? Oh, Jody, you're here, Macredo.
Feel like I'm
All
on the room right now, but yeah.
Okay, and what we're waiting on is Terry. We believe he's going to come and join in, but we believe that Air and Dan are not able to join, right? That's what I'm hearing.
Correct.
And then I can see John Clark. I can see Anthony Ruggiero. I can see Nick Ward-Willis. And then who else do we have? I got Colin Malone. I can see him. And I think we've got 2 visitors for our workshop. Barry Cohen and your colleague, whose name is?
Alexander Blakely, architect for Barry.
Hey, Alexander, how are you?
Hi.
Good. And you're standing. Well, or it looks like you're standing. I could be wrong.
No, I'm saying,
Mayor,
Okay. Yes?
Mayor, I would just note for the record that tonight's meeting is being convened in accordance with the open meetings law as modified by Governor's Executive Order 202.1, which allows virtual meetings to occur, and that, as you've indicated, you do have a quorum present for the workshop. And in accordance with the executive order, the public is being provided with the opportunity to observe the meeting via viewing it on YouTube through the transmission on the video conference link.
Okay. Thank you, Nick.
That's my legal disclaimer.
Okay. So having done that, we were actually also looking to have a public presence in the courtroom. It's actually easier not to. We didn't quite work out all of our feedback issues, but we can go from there. For anyone wanting to join online, I think we provided a dial-in and instructions, whether it's a phone line or YouTube. And so I hope you're there. We'll know better as we do these things. We haven't missed a meeting yet, but we're trying different technology and we'll go from there. So this is a workshop, and let me just see our first item. I guess our first item of direct business, besides the disclaimer on virtual meetings, is the zoning tables. And we're going to talk about the transition district, and we were going to have John lead that discussion if you're able to do so, John.
All right, can you hear me?
Yes.
Good. After the last meeting, our last workshop, we discussed the possibility of adjusting the area per unit calculation for residential uses in the T district, the transition district. As it is now in the tables that have been circulated for quite a while, it's according to the least restrictive adjoining district. So that makes it, in most cases, 5,000 square feet minimum per unit. There's a couple places where there's a RD, R 7.5, and there's a RD 4 and 5 that touch the transition district well. So they would have slightly different ones, but generally speaking, probably 90% of the lots have 5,000 square foot neighbors. So, so I did look at all the parcels, the residential parcels in particular in the T district, the proposed T district, and I put together a memo that summarizes their sizes and where 2-family and 3-family and even 1-4-family is in the district already. And I'm hoping that people have looked at that, or I can put it up on the screen if you'd like.
I've looked at it.
Yeah, let's keep talking about it.
Okay, so in general, the units are clustered around the 3,000 to 7,000 square foot area, the existing parcels. These are residential parcels only at this point. There are some that go as high as 27,000 square feet and some that go down as low as 1,650. So there's a good mix. There's out of the 109 total residential parcels I counted, 80 are single family, 24 are 2-family, 4 are 3, and 1 is a 4-family. So there's a bit of diversity already there. We talked about the possibility of lowering the 5,000 square foot threshold for per unit to something lower, undefined. Based on this research, I could say at least you should consider lowering it because a substantial number of the units or the existing lots are below that that threshold. For instance, I think it was 40 some percent of the lots were 4,000 or below. So at any rate, there are some commercially identified parcels in that district. Most of them are sort of the back ends of Main Street properties that spill over into the transition district, but there was 9 that are sort of mixed in within the residential areas already. They must be pre-existing. The largest lots, if you were interested in sort of what the maximum development potential in that area is, there's
All right, thank you.
Terry.
Sorry about
There's,
that.
the greatest area for development in this district is probably the 2 lots along Fishkill Avenue. The first 2 lots on the right as you drive up Fishkill Avenue from Main Street, they total over 40,000 square feet in common ownership. There's 2 lots, the auto body shop and the 4-family blue Second Empire house that's on that parcel. And they showed interest in developing, and I did break that down. If for instance, it was 5,000 square feet, it would be up to 8 units on that property. They already have the right to do 4,000 because they're up against the RD4 district, which has a 4,000 square foot minimum, and that would allow 10 units. And if you went down as low as 3,000 square foot, you could get up to 14 units on that property. Plus, you in theory could get commercial on the first floor, office uses primarily, or not retail or service, but some sort of mix of uses that are allowed in the proposed T district. I also included in the packet a map of the T district that shows where the largest parcels are. So you can see where most of these lots are already small enough. They're not going to be developed in any other way other than what they are. There's a few that are, that could be turned in from 1 to 2, for instance. But a lot of times the configuration of the lot, where the house is, the narrowness of the lot, the room for parking, all that stuff makes it hard to turn an existing building into 2. There's very few vacant parcels in this district. I think I only ran across 3. So there's not a lot of room for development except on those very larger parcels. And I listed them individually on that map if you have that in front of you, or I can put it on the screen if you like.
Can you put it on the screen? I have it in front of me, but that might be a useful visual if you're able to. That means you have to take control.
Can you see it now?
You still look like you are the same.
Let me go back. So you don't see the map yet? Let me try this again. It says host disabled participant screen sharing. So Colin, can you open me up for screen sharing?
Yeah, John, I'm going to give you that ability just a second. Who can switch?
Okay.
All right, so keep talking.
All right. There's also 2 large lots on Blackburn Avenue. They both have buildings on them right now. One's a 3-family. All right. Are we up?
Yeah.
There you can see it. So I'm over here. Can you see my cursor?
No.
All right. So on Blackburn Avenue, that area up on the far right end of the screen, there's a what was previously or currently an office business district. There's a 3-family house with 27,800 square feet in the historic district, overlay district. And there's a
So
23,700 2-family house below that. So those are, in theory, could be expanded with an addition off the back or some other means of adding units. These 2 lots on Fishkill Avenue, again, where the auto body and the blue house, the Second Empire blue house on
This is
Fishkill Avenue.
the middle of the screen. You've got 2 rectangles in that middle. One says 17,000 auto
Right.
shop, the other 25,900 4-family.
And I would
Those
just
are
know
under
people
common
can,
ownership, so they could be up to 12 or 14 units, or depending on what area density you decide on. And then the other one that has the most potential, I think, is the lots between, I remember this, Chestnut and Cedar.
That's correct.
There's a vacant lot there that's large, and there's a existing auto body shop. Trying to remember the name of the guy. Starts with a C, but I can't remember it right now. So there's 3 lots there. 2 are vacant, and 1 has that auto shop on it, auto sales. It says Servone Auto Sales.
Yeah.
So if somebody, those are in 3 different ownerships. If somebody combined those, I think I got up to 9 units there. But it would also depend on whether you could fit the parking, whether you could exist within the setbacks, whether somebody could get ownership of all 3 lots. So that's more speculative. I think your primary possibility of development is on Fishkill Avenue.
Okay. So John, the T discussion that you've teed up is basically a density. And as you said, the question that we raised was, would we consider a density in between the adjacent neighborhood density and that of Main Street? And what you've proposed is maybe 1 per 3,000. It looked like that's where you're heading, although it could be a little less dense than that.
I
That's
threw out
what
the option of 3 or 4.
right. And then the other one you said was not only could it have some density, but it also could have the option of something on the ground floor. That would be a less intensive commercial use.
Right. But then you would probably start restricting the residential capacity because parking would be required, and you get into setback issues and whatever else. So it's not like you would get the 12 or 14 units on top of the office, more than likely. But maybe I didn't do a layout on, an option layout on these or anything.
Okay. Council thoughts, views, questions?
It's Amber. I'm a little hesitant about 3, but I feel a little bit more comfortable with 4 as the minimum square footage. I and still leaning towards keeping density a little bit more neighborhood residential-ish because they are abutting those kind of zones. So that's why I'm kind of leaning for that middle ground.
Yeah, I was thinking the 3,500 would be a good compromise for those reasons. How do we get off the screen? I can't see anyone.
Yeah, I agree with Amber. I guess 3,500 I could see as a compromise, but I would definitely err toward smaller.
So, yeah, the only thing I would note, not so much on a number, but that the T areas in blue that we're looking at are sort of differ pretty significantly as to what the existing sites are. John has kind of pointed out the ones that are vacant sites, but most of the ones in the T area are occupied with homes. I mean, I'm looking at the north side of DeWint, between Cross Street and the county building. Keep going on DeWint, those are all built out homes. It's not like there's a lot of room. There might be one lot in there that's available, that's a auto shop. Sort of similar on the T area north of Main Street toward the West End. And it's only when you get to the areas that John described, sort of on the north side around the municipal lot at Church Street between Chestnut and Eliza. And then when you get to Fishkill Avenue and then over to Talix, that we've got some room. So the other option is to kind of split it up based on what we see, unless we want some of those existing homes to have a different zoning than the homes that are there. Any thoughts on that, John?
Well, I did note that, there's the largest percentage of lots are in the third 3,000 to 3,999. So I think, there's a lot of lots in there that are already non-conforming to the 5,000 square foot standard. That's something to think about, but I don't think it really matters much to existing built out homes. But there are a lot of very small lots in this. If you can look at the map, you can see some of them are very small and very narrow. So there's, other than a few, there's that one north of, up by, it's on Elm Street, 20,000 square foot.
Yep.
That's a big parcel. There's one at the corner of Cliff and DeWint. That's a large parcel. It could be subdivided, and those are corner lots, so you'd be able to subdivide them a little more easily. So you might get some of that. Not a lot, but some. So it really, I think it depends on how you want those, 8 or so bigger lots. What development potential you want on those. There's also the ones along Henry Street that are now in the OB district. They're almost all around 11,000, 12,000 square feet. But most of them already have 2-family or commercial buildings on them.
Yeah, and would we consider extending the T up a lot on Fishkill Avenue on the right-hand side? Underneath your sign, John, that says 17,000 square foot auto shop, is there a parcel to the north of that?
Yeah, the parcel with the, what is it?
The Masonic Lodge.
Masonic Lodge, right.
Yeah.
That's a large parcel, but it has some difficulties accessing Fishkill Avenue.
Yeah, I agree.
So you would probably have to share a driveway with the condos to the rear.
Mm-hmm. That's how you get there now, yep. There's no way to get, it's up too high to get to it down to Fishkill Ave.
Yeah. So that would restrict the amount of development there, but you could certainly include that in the T district if you wanted to.
I actually think the driveway coming from Verplank is their driveway, the Masonic driveway. Goes through the back of the temple.
Yeah, agree.
And I think that parking it also belongs to the Masonic Lodge as well.
Is that an active lodge?
No,
So some of that parking does not belong to the synagogue?
None of it does.
None of it does? Wow. Okay.
They pay rents to the owner of the lodge.
Right.
yeah, the part that I'd like to consider that I don't have a clear view yet is that some of the existing homes in what was PB, what is at the moment PB, maybe should be something else other than T. I gather, again, let's look at the top left, right? So you're north of Main Street, south of Church, sort of in that section. Or you're on DeWint, kind of on the south side looking in. Those are all built out homes. If they're in a T, does that give them more options to use those homes, or do we want to leave them as homes, or why move away from single family, right? That's the question I would ask, and I don't know the answer to it. I mean, I know why it was there originally. It was there because the master plan wanted to bulldoze all the homes, put in a really wide return street on Church and Henry, and build parking, right? That's long gone, thankfully.
But it doesn't necessarily mean that we're not going to have residential is still allowed in this new transition zone, right?
Yes.
So it just gives them other options in terms of use, right? So it wouldn't deny it. They wouldn't be grandfathered in just because they're residential homes. It's allowed by definition, right?
Yes.
John?
Yeah. But you're also, at least according to the draft tables, allowing a certain number of non-residential uses in that district. That's why it's was called the transition district.
Yeah.
So the original idea was to allow more commercial flexibility in there, not retail or restaurant or anything like that, but small offices and bed and breakfasts and workshops, and I can't remember all the names of all the districts. I have them here if you want me to list them off. And then at the last workshop, there was the idea, well, maybe we should give a little more flexibility for residential as well, and not stick to the 5,000 square foot minimum, which pretty much means that only a dozen or so of these lots would ever change.
Well, so again, I don't have a strong view, but I would actually lean toward a denser arrangement like 2,500 square feet, recognizing that any parking requirements would probably limit its overall density anyway. But if there were a lot that could pull it off, I guess I'd rather have it right next to Main Street rather than somewhere else. Right, I mean, especially if we're kind of controlling the height on Main Street, but we still want density around Main Street. This kind of helps us get there. I'm not sure there's a huge difference between 3,500, 2,500, but I just picked a round number because it's half of 5,000.
And the building height out here, John, is 35 or 42?
35 with 2.5 stories.
Right.
So it would have to have dormers or some sort of slope roof on the third floor,
Mm-hmm.
if they wanted to try a third floor.
And another question, could we encourage 2 families in the single-family structures that are there? Is there a way to allow that in that zone?
Well, it is allowed under the draft tables as currently shown. It's just whether you have enough area to make it legally number of units per acre.
Okay. So again, I would, I'm just looking at the table. I see where you're saying in terms of the uses that are permitted. If we were at 2,500, which is basically saying a 50 by 100 foot lot, you could get 2 units in there instead of 1. Because we're closer to Main Street. That's kind of where I was thinking. I don't think we have to resolve it. We've heard some other numbers, 3, 3.5. Any other views on that? And we can sit with it and come back to it.
Let's sit on it. I need to think about that.
Yeah, honestly, I don't have a clear view either, so.
Is this something, John, that you want to take care of sooner than later?
Well, I would like to see these tables adopted, but you know, it's the timing is up to you. I think we're getting relatively close, and we've been at these tables for well over a year.
Yeah.
So I think we're on the short list of decisions at this point. We have to decide on this. I think we've been over the tables multiple times, multiple ways. So we're probably at least ready to hear from the public about that. And the map changes seem to be pretty stable. So the only other thing is that the text itself, the council hasn't really reviewed the text where I made some other changes as part of this process. Particularly the special permit section, I increased the language in that, the general special permit conditions, some other things. So if you want a homework assignment, I would say at least everybody look at the text, and that's the sort of last thing on the table in terms of moving forward on adoption.
Yeah, so John, on the text, what I would suggest is schedule a meeting this week sometime, an hour or however much time you think that's necessary to go through that. I will attend, and any other council member who wants to join in can, and we'll go through it, because that's the only way to ensure that we get our homework done, right?
Okay.
Right?
Maybe
And then-
Colin can set that up.
Yep. And then I have a proposal.
Just need to be less than a quorum
Okay, so
unless it's noticed.
if we have too many volunteers, we'll flip coins and send somebody home. And then I do have a proposal. I want to suggest that the density in the T district be double the density of the adjacent residential district. How about that?
So an R15, what's the density there?
Would be R1 2.5.
Well, what's the density of R15?
Oh, that's 5,000 square foot per lot. So it would be 2,500 if you double that.
Uh-huh.
Right, if you got an RD4, you could do 2,000. If you have an R175, it would be 3,750.
Mhm.
I just was trying to find a rough number to make it work.
Right.
We don't have to do that. I was just trying to propose it.
but we're not gonna make a decision now.
Okay, we can put it off to one more workshop if that's all right.
I'd be okay with that.
All right. Hmm. And then just last thing on this, there were a couple of adjustments to the T-zone that we might want to consider in terms of lines. And so let's bring that up the next time as well. But I just want to take a look and make a couple of suggestions. You know, I think the one that we've heard from at the West End is the first house on Cross Street, which is, you can see in the T-zone, brings the T-zone pretty close to Main Street. You know, there was a request that we consider putting that back into Main Street, and I think the lot has been merged. So that strikes me as pretty sensible. I think the other one I heard at a proposal was that on West Church Street, there are what are marked as some R15 lots on the south side of Church Street that are in fact just parking for the airplane building, which is the building in the middle of Main Street, between Main Street and Church. And they're laid out here as if they were single family lots. We may want to stick that in the T zone as well. I think the T zone ends before that, right, John?
I didn't pick up where exactly these things are.
So west of Cross Street on West Church, there is a big lot in the middle of the
Oh, yeah.
block, on the middle of the block. That big lot is a apartment building, and all of the lots next to that big lot in the middle that face Church Street are actually just parking right now, or grass.
Yes.
Right. So we might want to get, in fact, kind of West Church, the entire one side, or maybe the one side up to the end of when the homes begin again as part of T. Just a thought. Any thoughts by council on that? Or if you know where I'm talking about, we'll make sure we get it on the map so you can see it.
Basically, talking building behind, over, sort of behind mountaintops.
Yeah, the Bannerman's building, right, where
Yeah.
Castle Realty is, Castle Keep, right? You've got that driveway that goes in next to the building between the Glassworks and the Realty, and that driveway goes into the back, and there's a big apartment building back there.
Right.
That's that apartment building is the lot in the dead middle of that block. There's a big white square in there. That's what that is. And the building must touch the edge of those lots on Church Street, and then behind them are either empty grass or rough parking right now. And then a driveway to get out onto Church Street, West Church. Right, so what I'm suggesting is that if we would consider, John, extending the T another block, say into half of West Church Street, and then pulling the 4 Cross Street out and sticking it, because the lot, I think they've merged that 4 Cross Street with the Main Street building in front of it.
They did.
Yeah, then I would put it back into CMS while we're doing this.
Okay.
I have no opposition to that.
Okay. And again, we're not finalizing, we're just going to bring it back up, all right? So what I heard us say is we're looking at that. I've made a suggestion, which is double the density. You know, I don't know, I'm just trying to make it easy. John, if you could come back with what that entails, and then these 2 zone adjustments. Then we'll also have a session later this week for an hour or however long it takes to go through the text. And I think that will advance the ball.
All right.
Everybody good with that?
Yeah.
I'm good with it.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay, and we have one more bite. We haven't agreed on anything yet, okay? All right, good. I think we're almost there. And then Colin, you will set up a session, send out an invite and see how many accept, and then turn down the fourth one.
Yes.
Okay,
You snooze, you lose.
are we ready to go on? Everybody good?
Yep.
Okay. I think our next item is a Craig House presentation. And we have two visitors with us, Alexander and Barry. Are we going to be able to give you the screen or something? How are we going to do this?
I could take over the screen to show our highlights of the video. I think the video was, the link to the video was distributed so that you could watch it, but I'm not sure.
Okay. Colin, are we able to give Alexander the screen?
Alex, go ahead and try and take it. If you're not able to, then I'll do it for you.
I don't see an option to share the screen anymore here.
All right, Colin, you want to try it?
Yeah, just give me 30 seconds. I'll pull it up.
Well, that wasn't bad in terms of bandwidth.
Yeah, it was, the music wasn't in sync. It was way out of sync, or at least on my side, but that was the gist of it.
And you want to tell us a little bit about where you're heading?
Yes, so, and there was, I don't know who of you have seen the accompanying brochure that we also distributed, but it just highlights those components of the video which you just saw. And in any case, this is a video that we put together to present a scheme for this 66 acres of property where the Craig House is now situated. But it just highlights those components of the video which you just saw. And in any case, this is a video we put together to present a scheme for this 66 acres of property where the Craig House is now situated. But it just highlights those components of the video which you just saw. And in any case, this is a video we put together to present a scheme for this 66 acres of property where the Craig House is now situated. But it just highlights those components of the video which you just saw. And in any case, this is a video we put together to present a scheme for this 66.
Yeah, is there a way to improve the video, Alexander? I'm not the video, the sound quality is not too clear.
Yeah, I don't know what happened. I just heard myself played back. It was strange.
Okay, that's better, I believe.
Okay, sorry about that. So that video which you just saw is an idea that we've been working on now for over a year and a half after investigating this 66-acre site on which this Craig House is situated. We looked at developing it in residential form, but we came to the conclusion that that hospitality would be a really exciting use for the site, because there's this Craig House which is already there, which has been in question for years now, that we would like to refurbish, and that would be, we'd be able to locate 15 guest rooms in that Craig House itself. And then we saw an opportunity with this, with the modern wing to that Craig House, to create another 200 plus rooms there, all in an adaptive reuse scenario, so that we would be actually building a very small carbon footprint on the site. So we thought that this was a great use of the beautiful terrain, the natural setting at Craig House, the 66 acres there, and that it would be an attractive thing for the city. So that said, the components which you saw in the video, I wanted to present through this highlights brochure here, which I'm not sure whether I can share or not here or not, or whether that will have to be shared from your side.
Alex, do you see the sharing option there?
Yeah, I've got it now. Can you, 1 second, please? For some reason, I'm not getting the share screen.
I can do it on my end. We ended up with a
Try,
when I tried that. So I'll give it
Alex,
a shot. If we end up with that again, I'll back out of it.
try Alt S.
share.
There you go. Someone's got it.
I can do it on my end. We ended up with a
Try,
when I tried that. So I'll give it
Alex,
a try. We end up with that.
I'm hearing an echo. Are you guys hearing an echo?
We ended up on a loop again.
All right, why
Colin,
don't
are
you
you
take,
on two devices? Yeah, there's an echo from Colin.
We ended up on a loop again.
all right, why
Colin,
don't
are
you
you
take,
on two devices? Yeah, there's an echo from Colin.
all right, Alex, can you talk us through some of this?
Sure.
We have,
So
we
the,
have,
the, the video was meant to present to you, the council, and also to serve as.
We ended up on a loop again.
all right, why
Colin,
don't
are
you
you
take,
on two devices? Yeah, there's an echo from Colin.
I'm sorry, we're not going to be able to share it. It's in your, it's available in your agenda packets.
Yep. All right, Alex, why don't you talk us through it, even though we can't get it on the screen?
Okay, so the Craig House, obviously, we all know, so that would be the entry point to what we're proposing to be this hotel facility, which would also include a modern wing where we propose to vertically extend the wing that now exists there so that we can locate approximately 200 more hotel rooms. But speaking to the whole site itself, we'd also like to locate approximately 20 tree houses along this ridge facing towards the Hudson River. There would also be, this is something that we would like to do in several phases. The first phase would include the refurbishment of the Craig House proper and the addition to the modern wing, as we're calling it. I'm not sure which maybe members of the council have already seen, Barry, the presentation deck that we put together, or was that never, has anybody seen that?
Just the video.
We have, but I think it's important that you explain it for the public, regardless of what we've seen.
Absolutely. So the main components on the 66-acre site that we're proposing are, as I said, the Craig House and the modern wing being approximately 215 guest rooms. In addition to that, we are proposing to locate about 20 tree houses along this ridge on the west side of the property. Unfortunately, I can't point that out. Maybe Colin could go to the site plan. Sorry, this is a little bit disjointed, and then in subsequent phases to the development, we are proposing also to build a spa on the site, which would essentially be saunas and spa-related program, which would be directly related to the hospitality that we're proposing at the Craig House and Craig House Modern. So, again, to reiterate, we thought that this was a great idea to propose something that had a very minimal carbon footprint and also building footprint on the site. It would preserve the natural landscape while also creating a nice attraction for Beacon and bringing in some tax revenue.
Yeah, and Alex, if I can describe it a little out loud for the public. So you've described the Craig House and the dormitory extension. You've mentioned the tree houses that are kind of in the hillside or the escarpment to the west of the main house. And you mentioned the spa. The spa would be at very close to the Tyranda Bridge, where the old brick schoolhouse is located, and you'd be using that that schoolhouse as part of the spa, as I understand it.
That's correct.
And then sort of at the corner of the property along Wolcott and Grandview, where you turn to the right to head to the Tyrone Bridge, there's several things in your subsequent phase, which would be up in that corner, conference center, farm to table fields and orchard, a co-working facility, music studios.
That's exactly right. So those are the components that we would see coming in a second phase once things were up and running, and we got a sense that the project was viable.
And this plan preserves the existing lawns and plantings, the historic plantings there?
It does to the utmost degree that is possible. We want to leave all of the trees, all the plantings, and in fact, very little, I believe, is disturbed. I mean, there would be some disturbance, and we would have to do some excavation, of course, for the spa, which you see at the top left corner on this site plan, and then also for the co-working spaces and for the conference center, which are to the east. And
So this is Nick. I was able to upload. Is this the information you wanted uploaded?
Yeah, you're doing great. That's the main map and that we've been talking through.
And I should mention
And people
also,
can-
I forgot to mention that we would also like to, and it's not shown on this, but this, unfortunately, we have the wrong map here, but I can, of course, send out the updated site plan here, but we're also proposing to extend the Greenway Trail across this site, which would be open to the public, which is, of course, right across the creek from our proposed 248 development on Tioronda Avenue. So roughly where you see the westerly property line at the top there at Fishkill Creek, there would be a greenway path extension running across this property.
Right, sort of in the one we're seeing on the screen, kind of trying to follow the yellow dotted line at the top of the map to the extent feasible, right?
Exactly.
Yep.
So that would run, essentially south, north, and past the spa on your top left there, and across at where your red cursor there is gone.
Yep.
Is there any intended use on the east side? I know this property that's part of this on the east side of Walcott Avenue.
Yeah. Well, we thought that would be an opportunity for some additional parking. I mean, and I did not mention, if you look down to the northwest of the Craig House, you can see there's some parking. I don't have the exact numbers for that parking, but I'm looking right now. We want to provide a great deal of the parking in that area there because it's most convenient. It's adjacent to the Craig House itself, but then across the street in the small portion of the property that you just mentioned, we would have also a lot of parking. I think that was the main function that we foresaw for that piece of the property.
Great. So I saw this earlier and had the discussion with you about Greenway Trail. I appreciate you picking it up. I think it's a very natural fit with this particular type of proposal. So thank you.
No problem. So if I could, I wish I could navigate this myself, but if we could just page through this, maybe I could mention some points. So what you're looking at now is, of course, the approach to the Craig House itself, which we would want to bring back to its, original 19th century glory. To the bottom left there, what you are looking at is actually, I don't know if you can really see that closely, but it's also included in the video. and one could pause and look at the stills there. But what we're showing there is this lounge area where we've converted the existing chapel. That's just, of course, one of the many components existing within this Craig House proper, as we're calling it. You can see through the windows there in this particular rendering. You could see the Craig House Modern, as we're calling it, which is where we would like to vertically extend the existing dormitories. And they're actually quite in their configuration and plan. They lend themselves very well to hotel rooms there. So we thought that was a really good adaptive reuse of that building there, which otherwise is, just sort of derelict now. I don't have a view, I believe, in this brochure, but one of the things we would like to do, actually, you could see it on the left side of the Craig House, or the east side of the Craig House. You can see there's sort of, if you would zoom in there, you can see this sort of colonnade. We would like to take down that enclosed tunnel there, which we don't like, and have an above ground way from the Craig House proper, as we're calling it, to the modern wing that you would walk across, and you could see as you approach through that colonnade there to the south of the property. And there would still be a connection underneath that bridge, connecting the kitchen and whatever back of house. Oh yeah, right. You could see it here actually pretty well if you zoom in to there. You can see. So we removed this enclosed tunnel which we didn't like, and made an above ground connection which would be covered.
Okay.
So, and what you're seeing on the bottom left there is, of course, a view of one of the modern rooms looking out onto the property, the Craig House, which we would like to keep as much as we can intact as far as the trees and plantings are concerned. So actually, if you page to the next, this is a view of the tree houses that we mentioned that are located along this ridge. What we like about this is that you can actually, from that drive which runs along the ridge, you can actually access these tree houses on a level way so that they can actually be accessible for accessible means, and you'd have a view down below from walking through from this natural landscape, looking up to the tree houses from below. If you page to the next page, this is a view of the spa that we're proposing, and what you see spilling down along that slope are the saunas that are located outside of the main enclosure.
And is this the spa that is leveraging the existing schoolhouse, or is this a different area?
It's actually located right to the north of that schoolhouse, and we envision actually approaching from where the schoolhouse is. There would be, you might be able to see it actually if you go back to the site plan. There would be a handicapped accessible elevator which would take you up to the top elevation from the schoolhouse, and then there would also be ways coming up. So you can see the existing schoolhouse there at the corner of the parking lot.
Right, that's the small square, right?
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So we envisioned coming in from that side and then reaching via an elevator the top portion of that site, and then essentially you would access the rest of the spa walking down the slope. Now, there's also we don't know to what extent we would be able to use some of the areas there where the pond is, because we understand that that's a protected zone there. But that would be something which would be subject to discussion.
Okay.
So I guess we can keep scrolling through and I'll mention some other points.
Okay, this is your next slide.
Right, okay, so this is just looking, this is a view of the waterfall that everybody knows about. And then in the bottom left there, you're looking towards the west, towards Beacon Mountain.
Okay.
And so the next slide, this is just a summary, but you can also see in this summary the north facade on the modern wing where we would add on some circulation. And you can see on the top of that also there would be a rooftop lounge there, and we're proposing a pool on the top of that. So.
Are you seeing it when I zoom in?
Yes, I'm seeing.
Okay,
So, okay,
so that's the last slide.
Yes.
got it. So, council reactions? I think you've seen some of this before.
It looks great. I like the adaptive reuse. Yeah, can it really be done in this? I mean, I don't know, are we saturated with development here, or is this something that is a fantasy, or is this, how real could this be?
I don't know, maybe Barry wants to speak to that, but we can say that we definitely have interested parties in operating.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, everybody. Thanks, Alex, for explaining all the details. And I know Alex worked on this for a very, very long time. Almost about 2 years right now in development. And to his credit, he did some phenomenal stuff, especially by trying to keep what I like the most about it is keeping the landscaping and reusing everything on the property, and coming up with the idea of the tree houses where you're not going to see it from outside from the road. It's basically everything is interior inside the property, and the spa where it's down in the bottom, which is going to highlight that whole section. Eventually, once we get through with building the bridge, and that in old Tyranda will be built out eventually, especially with what we're looking forward for 248 to get them built out, and coming down to 555. So the way I look at it is, I don't know what it is, whether it's 2 years or 3 years or 5 years from now, but certainly in the near future, to this become a real life of the city. This piece of property will bring a tremendous amount of jobs. It's going to be, I think, Beacon's icon. It's going to be something very special, I believe. There isn't something like a product like this around and around. And with the train station, with everything that works around and around, it's just a beautiful piece of land and property. And so, obviously it's going to should be built in phases, not everything at one time. But, depending on the use of what's what, when the world becomes world again, hopefully this will shine. But
Mr.
we
Coe-
want to go.
Sorry to interrupt. How much of this is dependent on the bridge being renovated? Do you expect traffic over that, or would that be a pedestrian?
We're good with pedestrian, and again, the traffic studies. I didn't do traffic studies, so I'm going to leave that up to the engineers of the city and the city's talks of the bridge. But certainly the pedestrian, the bridge itself, the pedestrian portion for sure, it becomes that this almost, I look at it almost being as a part of Main Street, especially if the trails eventually go across all the way around, all the way all the way up to Main Street. And it becomes people, especially in nice walking days, it becomes a part of it. Just like people love walking Main Street, as they love walking down to the brewery and to that whole section of the bottom of Main Street, to East Main Street. This will become a full tourist kind of attraction where it brings out the shine of the city. That's the way I look at it.
I'm not sure if you can answer this or not, but how many jobs do you estimate this bringing in?
Right. Hello?
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 Can you hear me? Can anyone hear me?
Yep, I can hear you, Terry.
Okay.
Looks like we lost Barry.
Let's go to our list of participants. Do we see Barry? No, we've lost him.
Yeah, it looks like we lost Barry for a second. So I don't know, Alex, the question I think was how many jobs would be estimated? I don't know if you know that.
I can't answer that, but I think Barry will pop back on and hopefully pop back on. It's something that we could get back to you on in any case.
Yeah. So I will just add that the current zoning on this site is R1 120, which is 2 acre single family housing. It is an historic overlay, which means it would be permitted additional uses. This would obviously be one of those. Terry, if you're comparing to housing, housing has no jobs. So this is obviously a net benefit. We'll see what his numbers are, but I think it's a very interesting and creative use of the property.
Agreed.
I don't think it would fit within the existing zoning. So you would have to modify the zoning to make it work.
Doesn't the historic overlay allow for greater numbers if it fits, if I remember some of the language?
Well, I'm just looking at it now. I haven't seen any of this, so I wasn't prepared to talk to it, but I'm just looking at the language now, and it says, may approve a special permit for any of the uses listed in said section. And hotels are not one of the listed additional uses. Bed and breakfasts are, but not hotels or conference centers or spas or whatever.
Yep.
So you would have to do some zoning work if you wanted to let this thing go on.
Okay. Yeah, you're right, because we wrote that with much smaller properties in mind.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Good.
You know, there were some proposals prior to what we put together for you here that Barry had considered when he purchased the property, which involved doing some luxury homes on the property. And you know, this was Barry's idea actually to refurbish the Craig House and do some sort of hospitality use there. And I thought it was a great idea. And everybody we've spoken to has been very excited about it. I'm very excited about it. And just especially because really you're not going to see much change on that site apart from what's hidden in the trees. We're using the existing buildings.
The building along the main road, the modern wing, as you called it, that's not a 4-story building now.
No, it's not. No, it's not. It's just a 2-story. So we would have to put some stories on top of it. We're proposing to put 2 stories on top.
Yeah. So that would be a big change in the frontage. That would be one thing would concern me, because it would diminish the historic quality of the house itself.
Right, but presently you're seeing, I believe, 1 story from Walcott, and so we've been proposing 2 additional stories, and I think there's a nice line of trees there too. So I think, yeah, that would be the one facade that would have some presence on wall cuts, and we would, of course, do studies to show exactly, what that presence looked like.
Hello?
Hi, Barry.
Hi. Yeah, I don't know. Somehow I got disconnected, but I'm back now. So I wasn't sure somebody was asking, it was a question. I don't know if it was answered or not.
They were asking how many jobs this might produce estimated, and I said I didn't know.
Yeah, that's the one portion I don't know, especially being that I am not in the hospitality business. So I would need to partner up with a hotel operator that's most probably something along the lines of a not a franchise hotel, more a boutique kind of hotel operator, and this would become like sort of a resort hotel. Yeah, that's a study we're going to do as soon as we know. The idea is to get this meeting off and running. Is this an acceptable thing to the city? Is this something that the city wants? To get the feedback from the city council, the mayor, and people to see, we're already spent, most probably a couple $100,000 on the design. And we have to know how far are we going? Are we going the wrong direction? Or are we going the right direction? And that's what we're here for today. And if we get the positive feedback, we're gonna go and take the concerns and address them and, keep on developing it.
So, I can give you 2 cents that I gave you the first time, Barry, when we took a look at this, which is, I raised a couple of questions. One about Greenway, you've already put it in. The other one about a pedestrian bridge at South Avenue, which you said no issue, in fact, still fits, if not better, depending on how the trails work. We also talked about it being part of a trail system, which I think, again, is a fit. If you ask me the likelihood of success of this, while I don't run numbers on this, we did have a hotel conference center being proposed down at our waterfront. It just turned out to be on land at approximately 0 feet above sea level, and so post Sandy that was scrapped. I do think that this price point of a hospitality on the train line, I think your numbers ought to work just fine financially, and I think it's a good fit for the city. So it's, you're just asking right direction, wrong direction, so I'd say right direction.
Okay, so the question is, how do we proceed from over here? And our steps, laying out some foundations.
Well, yeah, but I do want to hear from other council members as well. I heard from George, generally sounded like right direction. Just want to hear from others.
Yep.
Yeah, initial reaction is I like the fact that you're keeping so much of what was already there, so much of the beauty of it. I think that I would really love the addition of the extension of a Greenway trail around there. So, and I do think that there will be significant job creation, hopefully. So yeah, I'm happy with the direction you're headed in at this point.
Yeah, same here. I'm really happy that the Greenway Trail is a part of this, and the fact that you're just using everything that's around, you're not clear cutting or knocking everything down. You're just basically using what you have and making it beautiful and adding to it. So I'm for it.
Just out of curiosity, oh, sorry, Amber, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, directionally, the idea of a hotel space, it looks like there's some farm area, some spa space is okay. I think there's a lot of details that need to be worked out. I'll just echo some of my other colleagues, and what I have heard from people that is important is the historic preservation of the property, the preservation of the landscaping. So I think those are some critical details that are needed. I think the ability of the public or the people in the city of Beacon to also enjoy the space is a detail I would be interested in hearing. So that's my feedback for the moment.
Yeah, I think it's an extremely challenging structure to deal with, and on any kind of sound economic plan. But I think this is probably the best solution to it, as opposed to it being cut up into condominiums or something like that. But I am curious about the organ that's in there. Will that be incorporated in any way into the final design?
We're definitely looking at it. We've had different opinions, but if you ask me today, if I had to make a decision today, it most probably will stay and be designed into something because of the historic of it. Even though I've had people that want to have it different shapes, but I don't know if it was going to work exactly. I don't know if it's I don't understand to the organ in details.
I wouldn't hold you to. Just curious about.
Yeah. We're gonna try to preserve the idea of the Craig's house is to preserve it and to use actually what's there. It almost is going to be like the rooms are going to stay the exact same size rooms, just modernized into normal bathrooms and normal stuff. But being what it is there right now should stay, and redo all the woodwork and all that stuff is going to be redone. That's the idea of it. In the back of it, to build wedding venues, space for event space, and so on. But that's onto the south side of the Craig's house.
Yeah, I don't know whether it was visible or whether anybody noticed. I forgot to mention that point. On the south side there, we have a sort of a large conservatory covering, which is a glass conservatory covering that area, which was envisioned to be for banquets and weddings.
I think there's one against that.
This whole Zoom conference looks like something like a new thing that came out. Beepers came out, and then flip phones, and then it became smartphones. So I think that this thing might still work, but it's going to get a little bit improved. And we're going to remember this is the first time we have a Zoom meeting.
Yeah.
Yeah, history in the making, and hopefully everything works out to be, more positive, and so the world becomes back world.
All right. So I would suggest that you basically got positive feedback in terms of the direction. Obviously, there are details. You're not asking us for some blanket approval. You're saying, is this the right direction? What you're hearing is yes. That means we reserve the right, of course, to look at the details. You heard some individual bits of feedback, and I hope that's helpful. And you know where to go from here. So.
Yeah. Okay. So that's basically the concept, and I think we should work with. I'm not sure if it's John Clark or to put together some kind of a roadmap of how do we start it, and how we already started. This was the first move, and how to continue. Yep. And we'll try to do that.
I think the next step would.
Go ahead, John. Nick.
Sorry, I think the next step would be to sort of coordinate with myself and John Clark and the administrator, Anthony, to talk about what are the legal issues, the zoning and planning issues, and how those would be addressed.
Okay.
Yeah, and Barad also suggests just a call. I want to catch you up on the other side of the creek as well. All right?
Okay. Yep. Very good. All right.
Very good. I think we're good for this item. Is that all right, Alex, Barry? We're going to keep going. And we want to thank you for joining our Zoom. All right.
Yep. Thank you for your time, and everybody stay safe and be well.
All right.
Thanks.
All right, take care. Good night.
All right. So next item, boy, it's also another remote attendee. Is there someone from Scenic Hudson?
Hi, yeah, it's Haley Carlock. I'm here for Scenic Hudson.
Great. And it seems like we've got something on our screen. Haley, are
Yep,
you
it's Nick.
controlling it or Nick's doing it? Okay.
Nick's doing
am.
it. I was going to attempt to do it, but Nick did such a good job last time that,
He gets paid to do this.
yeah.
It's all on the retainer.
Who knew that you
Let
would
me know
be
when-
sort of the Zoom aficionado? But that's great. So yeah, I'm here just to give an update on where we are on the Dan's Camera project, the Article 10 proceeding, the expert that we've hired and engaged with some support from the city, and what we can expect for next steps. I'm not going to go over the whole sort of background that I discussed with the council back last summer when I presented, but if there are any questions or anything that you want me to touch on that's not included in the presentation, please just interrupt me and ask, because I want to give you guys the information that you're looking for. So if you can go to the first slide, Nick. Thanks. So this is just a graphic that shows at a high level sort of the whole Article 10 bidding process. And as a reminder, it's the New York State Board on Electric Generation Siting and the Environment who is the decision maker ultimately on whether this project goes forward or not. It's really a one-stop shop with all of the permitting, environmental, siting, and otherwise subsumed in this one state board for electric generation siting. And just to give you an idea of where we are, as you see with the little graphic there, just about in the middle of this process, whole sort of public outreach and development of the application has passed us by. And now we are right after submission of the formal application, but before the much more formal process of trial type hearings, evidence, public statements, and eventually the decision occurs. Next slide, please. Thanks, Nick. So Dan's Camera submitted their formal Article 10 application in December of last year. This is an extremely voluminous document. I think it's over 7,000 pages, a ton of information in there from environmental impacts to economic impacts, how it's going to impact the electric system in the state of New York, so on and so forth. So their application was submitted in December, but in February, the siting board found that their application was not complete. It was deficient. And what that means is that the siting board did not believe there was enough information on certain issues in the application for the siting board to begin its review. And there were a number of different reasons for that. Some of them were pretty pro forma, like you printed a map at the wrong scale. Others were much more substantive. And an important example, I think, is that they found that the explanation that Dan's Camera gave that it's required to give as to how the project would be consistent with the State Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act that was passed last year was not adequate, and they asked for additional information on that. In response, Dan's Camera supplemented their application just a few weeks ago in March. We have to see now what the siting board decides to do. There is no time frame within which they need to respond to the supplement. They could do it quickly, they could take months, and they could come back and say, yes, thank you, your application is complete. Now we'll sort of kick off the formal review process. Or they could say, that's great, but there's still outstanding additional information we need, and kick it back to Dan's Camera. So that process could go on for quite a while. There's no exact timeline that needs to be followed. But once the siting board says, yes, your application is complete, we've got the information we need, that begins a 12-month clock for that review process to happen, the evidentiary hearings, the public input, and eventually the decision by the siting board. So once it is complete, there is a 12-month clock that starts ticking. Next slide, please. So as you're all obviously aware, Beacon is an intervener party in the Article 10 process, which gives the city the ability to provide facts and commentary and perspective to the siting board throughout the proceeding once things really get moving. And as an intervener, the city joined our application, Scenic Hudson's application for intervener funding, which is funding provided through the siting board, but by the applicant, by Danskammer, to hire an energy economics firm, Synapse, to do some review and analysis related to Danskammer's application. And fortunately, thanks in good part to the city's support, we were awarded the funding that we needed to hire Synapse. So thank you so much for that. And just to go over really quickly who Synapse is and what we hired them to do. They're about a 25-year-old firm specializing in energy economics and environmental topics. They really specialize in the electric power sector, and they're based in Cambridge, Mass, but they do a lot of work with the New York electric sector. You may have seen some of their reports from 5-10 years ago on Indian Point closure, Indian Point transition plans. They did a lot of work on that, I believe, for Riverkeeper. So we hired Synapse to really focus on the core claims that Danskammer made to support its contention that its project is a beneficial addition to the grid, which is a necessary thing that they need to demonstrate under the public service law. It's the fundamental demonstration that they need to make to be able to get their siting permit. So Synapse has the expertise to evaluate these claims and how the project fits in or doesn't with New York State's greenhouse gas reduction goals to help, support our case of concern and opposition to the project. They are engaged now. We've had a kickoff meeting with them, although the substance of their work has not yet commenced since we're still in this kind of waiting phase. And now I'm going to talk a little bit about some additional information that we have now that we didn't have last year when I spoke to you all about the project and its potential impacts. Next slide, please. So these are graphs that we created, Scenic Hudson created, but this is using raw data that is included as part of Danskammer's application. This is their data that's in their application. Again, our expert has not yet done their modeling. They've not had a chance to do their report. So this is their data. It's just us creating a graph to make it more clear. So when I last spoke to you all, we had very little information about exactly, what is this plant going to emit? How is it going to compare to what's there now? We just don't know. Now we have some more information. So this graph shows it's a comparison of the current plant's actual emissions averaged over a 2-year period. I think they chose 2014 to 2016. So it's the current plant's actual emissions on an annual basis averaged over 2 years. And a projection of what the current plant could emit if it were to run as often as Danskammer projects that it's going to run, which is quite often. And so, suffice it to say for the pollutants on this graph, which are nitrous oxide, nitrogen oxide, particulate matter, and VOCs, all of these things are major causes of respiratory illness and asthma. For all three of these pollutants, you see a dramatic increase with the new plant versus the current plant. And Danskammer performed this analysis as part of, they're required to do it for their air permitting. It's called a netting analysis. It's basically to show, is there going to be an increase in pollutants over the existing plant, and is it going to be significant? And for all of these pollutants, Danskammer admitted that, yes, in fact, it is going to meet that regulatory threshold for a significant increase. And you can see there that it's between, 25 to up to 40 times more pollutants projected annually for these pollutants than what the current plant is actually emitting. Next slide, please. And so this is the same basic concept here, but this illustrates just greenhouse gases. So carbon dioxide primarily, and also methane. And as you can see, the existing plant, because it runs so little, emits a relatively small amount of greenhouse gases. And the new plant is projected to emit 4,000% more. And again, these are Danskammer's own numbers, just illustrated by us, which really I think shows you know, the true picture of what you're going to see with a new gas plant that's going to run nearly all the time, much more than the existing plant. Next slide, please. So, you know, the question that we get a lot is, so Danskamer continues to claim the new plant is cleaner. How can they say that? This is their own data. And just very briefly, and these are some of the things that our experts really going to get into when they do their analysis, is that their entire claim about the plant being cleaner is based on their modeling projections, which they claim show that on a regional basis, the new plant might be dirtier than the old one, but it's going to offset other older, dirtier sources on a quote unquote regional basis. And therefore, on that regional basis, the overall equilibrium will be that there'll be cleaner air. And it's a statement they often repeat that I think is a little bit misleading, and our expert agrees. So when they say regional, they define regional as the state of New York, all of the New England states, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Maryland, and the entire province of Ontario, Canada, which is very unusual for a region in this sort of modeling to be so large. So they're not talking about the Hudson Valley region or the New York State region. They're talking about an enormous area. And when you look at that whole area, they calculate that their plant will offset enough dirtier sources that if you look at that whole regional space, there will be a benefit. But even their own modeling within New York State, if you take away all those other states in Canada, within New York State, on a statewide basis, their own modeling admits that the greenhouse gas emissions statewide are projected to increase over 300,000 tons per year with the new plant online versus current conditions with the old plant. Next slide, please. And so this is where our expert Synapse is going to come in. And as I mentioned, we've engaged them. They've done some quick review, but we haven't gotten to the formal process where we'll do discovery. They will, Synapse will perform their own modeling. They've got the ability to do the same modeling that Danskamer did. And we'll have, you know, a thorough report from them and testimony that we'll submit through the Article 10 process. But their preliminary thoughts on a quick review of the application, their immediate reactions were, you know, the 3 bullets that I have here, which is 1, Danskamer's modeling modeled the New York State energy system with only 1 large-scale renewable energy project in service. That's the sort of future reality that they modeled, which does not comport with what we know the future will be in New York. Today, as we sit here, there are 4 projects, large-scale renewable energy projects fully permitted and beginning construction, and there are dozens upon dozens more in the queue, and we expect that to only increase. So the statewide energy picture that's likely to be here in 5 to 10 years is much different than what Danskamer modeled. The second thing is that Danskamer showed only a single model year. They modeled 1 year, I think it was 2022 or 2023, rather than showing a few different scenarios, which is the way this modeling would typically be done. And finally, as I was insinuating on the previous slide, they really inappropriately included a very wide geographic region in their modeling analysis. Our consultant was particularly struck by that, and it seems like it may have been some sort of gamesmanship to make the numbers work favorably for them, but you know, we'll see when our expert does the full analysis. So I think that's the end of the presentation, Nick. And so I just wanted to go over where we are, what we can expect, and the work that we've engaged Synapse to do with the city's support, and then happy to answer any questions that you all may have.
It's Amber. I have a question on the last slide, the bullet point about expecting changes in energy generation. Is that anticipating an increase in access to renewable energy, or is there something else going on there that we're expecting a large change?
It's primarily the dramatic inclusion of new renewable energy sources, as well as the expected retirement of a number of older oil burning generators, primarily in the New York metro area. So the single, by choosing a single year not very far into the future, it doesn't give a full picture of what, how it will impact the generation mix and therefore the emissions mix in New York State.
Thank you. I guess I'll just ask one other question. Is there anything that the public should know, or anything that they can be doing at this point in time? I think public comments might be closed for now, but what can they do?
Sure. Public comments, technically they're not closed. You can submit comments on the siting board site at any time. There's no sort of new document or new formal opportunity for a reaction to a proposal right now. But if folks want to, they can go on to the Department of Public Service website for the Dan Scammer case, and they can weigh in, they can submit their comments. I would say another key thing that folks could do is to reach out to their state representatives. This is a state permitting process. There's one very small federal permit. There's no local permits. It's really a state permitting process. And, all of our state representatives, they've been hearing from constituents who are concerned or opposed to the project, but they've been hearing a lot from Dan Scammer and from the union representatives as well. And, a lot of times they just aren't quite sure, what to believe, what the right facts are. So to the extent that people are concerned about this and want to weigh in, I would really encourage them to reach out to their state assembly member and state senator about this project, and let them know how they feel and why they might be concerned about it.
Okay. Other comments from anyone? Okay. Thank you for joining us from wherever you are to wherever all of us are. And, it works fine. We're glad to have St. Hudson involved. We're glad to be an involved party, and we appreciate your work and happy to have partnered with you.
Yeah, no, thank you, Mayor. And we really appreciate the city being involved and specifically supporting the intervenor funding application. That was really big.
Okay, I'm going to push this along if that's okay. Thank you, Haley. And I think our next item is about 16 West Main Street. Someone want to pick this one up? Who's this one? John or Nick or?
Yeah, but I think John's more familiar with it, but I can certainly look at it. It's a, speak to it. It's a proposed mixed-use 62 residential unit development at 16 West Main Street. It's before the planning board for site plan approval and I believe subdivision through a lot merger. Because it's mostly family housing, it requires a special use permit from the council. So before the planning board or the council can do anything, there needs to be that determination made who is going to be the lead agency. The planning board has indicated it's their intent. They desire to be the lead agency. So they've circulated a notice declaring their intent to be lead agency. And now, because the city council is the other involved agency, the city council needs to decide, do they wish to get involved in the secret process or leave it to the purview of the planning board? That's the question that's before the council tonight.
If I could add one more thing, it only needs a special permit for the rear parking lot. It's a corner parcel at the corner of Bank and West Main. And they originally came into us with 62 units and 40 some parking spaces. And the linkage district requires 1 space per unit. They had this landlocked portion of the parcel that actually spills into the R1 7.5 district, I think. So they added the 15 spaces that they needed on that rear landlocked piece of their parcel that's behind the adjacent commercial building. And but to have a parking lot in a residential district needs a special permit from the council. So the housing itself doesn't need a special permit, but the parking lot in the rear does.
Thank you, John.
But
And the issue at hand is just lead agency. I have no objection to planning board being lead agency for seeker.
Were we not going to, okay, I'm not, yeah. Were we not going to review this area in terms of considering some mandatory commercial space? I thought that was on the either a back burner or was to be discussed at some point. Am I wrong in that?
Oh, I don't think.
I remember that.
What was that, Jody?
I think I remember that,
Yep.
having that discussion.
I don't have any, the council hasn't actually discussed that in any detail in a public session that I know of. But right now, they're allowed to have commercial district, commercial uses on that parcel. But the linkage district purposes statement is primarily focused on residential housing to support the waterfront and Main Street. So they, as of right, can do what they're asking to on that parcel. Now, you obviously can change that. Where they are in the process is they've been before us, I don't know, 4 or 5 times. They've been before the Architectural Review Subcommittee. The thing we're really waiting on before we could make any determination on the site is the parking study. They've been dragging their feet on that. I'm not sure exactly why, but that has to be submitted before we can do any sort of environmental analysis and the possibility of a negative declaration, which would be required before it's actually sent to the council for the special permit on the parking. Some of the planning board members said that they would prefer to see some commercial on the ground floor, but it's not required by the district. That would require a zoning change.
Yeah, and I guess that's what I have a vague memory of us discussing, only because, you know, at the time that it was zoned, we were afraid of drawing people away from Main Street, but we've had subsequent discussions about creating a breadcrumb of commercial space coming from the train station all the way up to Main Street. And given that there's already existing commercial places now happening there, it would be, in my mind, a continuity of what is already existing. I understand it takes zoning, but I thought we had the opportunity, and I thought we were going to discuss that before it got this advanced in terms of design and process.
Yeah, so it's not a vague memory, George. I think we did discuss it as council. I sent an email to the planning board and zoning board last week, because remember we had that free Monday last Monday, and we were looking at having a joint meeting. In that email, I said one of the things that the council is looking at is linkage waterfront development and looking at increasing the commercial component, which is exactly the issue that you're raising. Because it's not saying that we don't want the residential density, but I think, you know, you have raised the issue of the breadcrumbs going from being apartments to being storefronts as you head up to Main Street. So I think we should take up the issue quickly. John, I think you're saying there's some time or not?
Well, there's always some time if it doesn't have any vested rights. But like I said, they've been before us for at least 3 or 4 months.
Yeah. Although, as you
and
said,
they're working on architecture, and there is, when we raise the option of having some sort of corner storefront possibility, they said the applicant doesn't do mixed use buildings and is not interested. That was their essential statement. But it's not, the building could happen that way. The thing about breadcrumbs is that they don't necessarily have to be on every parcel. You could still have, I mean, the parcel just to the east, I guess, is already commercial. So their argument is that they want to have residential close to the train station so that they could do transit-related development.
Okay.
I'd still like to have this conversation on a council level and just see how the majority of the council feels about it. And I guess it should be a pressing discussion.
Is the applicant willing to change or be a little more flexible, or are they stuck on just having it be all residential?
Well, that's their clear preference. They're only reluctant to do it unless required to do it. So, you know, you have the authority to do what you want. They have said at least twice during planning board meetings when this was brought up with 2 different members who wasn't there at the previous meeting, that they don't have any interest in commercial and that they want to keep things according to their building plan.
Yeah,
I think-
agree with, go ahead.
No, Jerry, please.
I said, I agree with George. It's a discussion we should have and have it as soon as possible.
Yeah, I agree with that also. I definitely think that we should put that on an upcoming workshop agenda.
And then the issue for tonight is the lead agency.
So I'd go back where Amber is. I'm not concerned with having the planning board be lead agency. I think ours is a zoning interest, and, you know, a developer, a parcel owner who goes to the planning board who has a matter of right can do something, and the planning board is suggesting that they don't have to do. It's a reasonable response to say, I don't want to do that. On the other hand, it's also a reasonable response for us to say, you know, we've had on our agenda for a while looking at increasing commercial space in that corridor. So I think it's timely for us to do it, but I don't think it requires us to take lead agency status.
Yeah, I agree with that.
I'm still in agreement.
So, John, I'm thinking the group is saying, yeah, we still want to do the tables in the T-zone, but we also want to get to this linkage piece. It is that very specific item, which is we've now come so far in our renaissance that I think the linkage, which people were afraid of commercial density, I think we're saying we should be willing to embrace it a bit more, and how we approach that. And if you could help us do that quickly, I'm hearing most of the people on the phone saying that's a relevant thing to do.
All right, I'll take a look and see how we can change the zoning down there to, what would it take?
Yeah.
To make
Okay.
that a requirement. And you're not talking like a whole floor, you're talking about the corner portion of it. The problem with this site is that it goes uphill on both Bank and West Main. And so the first floor gets buried about a quarter way down the front of the building. So the likelihood it'd be very difficult, I think, to have, you know, a requirement for the whole first floor to be commercial. You could have a commercial component on the corner where the first floor is a full first floor.
Yeah.
Aren't there other properties in this zoning area? Like, I think we're talking about the zoning area holistically, aren't we?
I think, yeah, if you're going to do it, you have to think of it as in terms of the whole West Main Street frontage.
Yeah, that's where I would want to prioritize the commercial on all along West Main Street. And if that involves the entire first floor, then I would be in support of that. If half of it's buried in the ground, but I don't see somewhat familiar with that property, and I don't see how it would only be the corner that would be a full floor.
If you look at the renderings that are on the planning board web agenda, you'll see how the first floor goes about 2/3 of the way down and is pretty much into the hillside, and they have windows only on the interior portion rather than on the exterior portion facing the streets.
So I haven't seen renderings, and they weren't included in our package.
But they certainly, what the planning board was questioning about was there's a sort of a corner element right on the corner of Bank and West Main, that could be some sort of commercial space and the rest of it could be residential. The other thing that we had talked about in terms of the tables was taking away the special permit requirement for a lot of the commercial uses along this district. So I would think that as part of this zoning change, you might want to do that. Go to what the council had previously discussed in terms of making these commercial uses as of right rather than by special permit to make the process a little less onerous.
Yeah.
All right, so could you do two things, John? If there's a rendering that kind of describes what you're talking about in terms of the steepness, you could kind of push that along to the council so we can take a look. I would encourage the council to go have a look down at that site as well. I think it's easier to see in person. And then if you could consider how one might you know, make the linkage district more commercial, in particular along West Main. I think that's what people are suggesting. And if you give us some options, as to how to go about it and what are the impacts, that would probably help us along, right?
Right. Okay, so I'll put together a package that doesn't have to wait for the tables to be adopted, that'll just be on the linkage district and focus on the West Main Street and Beekman Street north side.
Council good with that?
Yes, thank you.
All right, cool. Thank you all. And then we also agreed lead agency, though, we'd pass along, right?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, all. Should we go on to the next one? We could send John home, but I think he's already home.
I thought I'd listen in for the short-term rental stuff anyway.
No problem.
He probably has a more comfortable chair than he usually does.
I think we all do.
So if we go on to short-term rentals, I think, Nick, that one's going to be you asking us some questions.
Right, good. So in your packet, I put up on the screen, I don't know if you can see it. You can, if you're on an iPad device, pinch in and zoom in on it. But as a result of the last workshop discussion on short-term rental local laws, there was what I refer to as the decision tree. Certain decisions that needed to be answered so that we could then come back to you with a draft local law. And it was decided this was a better way to proceed to get your thoughts with respect to topic areas, and then we'll draft the local law. So I don't know if people have had a chance to go through these, but we can go through them. And certainly council members and John and Anthony interrupt me, ask questions, and we'll go through it. So the first one is the city satisfied with the definition of owner occupied that is set forth below? Does the definition of owner occupied in that first bullet point capture what you wanted to capture? And it reads that owner occupied. Okay.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah, this works in an R zone. I'm not sure it works in an apartment or in a non-R zone. So if I have an apartment, if it's in an R zone, the only way you could rent one of the units the way this is written is you'd have to live in the apartment building in order to be able to rent one. Is that how you read it?
Yes, but I thought maybe later on we dealt with, that's one of the questions on the second page. Does the city council want to allow short-term rentals in multifamily homes or buildings? So that's a separate question.
Yeah, I'm good with the owner occupied as it applies to ones and twos. I thought you could also add owner occupied or lessee occupied, which would allow the lessee to do the short-term rental. And that might be another question as well.
I believe it is, but that's certainly possible.
Okay.
In terms of, well, maybe we'll get to it when we get to the apartment discussion, but I think by allowing it in an apartment, we're undermining the sort of intent of, not impacting the housing market and the availability of apartments or rental units.
That's
Whereas
what
if it's someone's bedroom or accessory apartment, it doesn't really kind of have that much of an effect on the market. So I'd be hesitant to include apartment buildings in this permitting process.
Yeah, so we're going to get to the apartments. I thought one of the options we were talking about was allowing in a multiple dwelling for one unit to go short-term, but not the rest. That would be one option we could use. And Nick, would you say you want us to wait on apartments for a while? Or do you want to bring us to bring it up now?
Well, I think if we go through these, I think they're arranged in a fashion that they build off of one another. So if we can hold the multifamily discussion, I've made a note that everyone is comfortable with the language as applies to one or two, but we're deferring to see how it fits in within the apartment discussion.
Okay, everybody good with that?
Yes.
Okay,
The second bullet point, under the draft local law, it is unlawful to use, establish, maintain, operate, occupy, rent, or lease any property as a short-term rental if the property is not owner occupied. And the property used as a short-term rental must be the principal residence of the owner at all times during the term of the short-term rental permit. Later on, we get to owner occupied, but just want to make sure, again, everyone is comfortable with the, must be the principal residence of the owner, which ties into it being owner occupied.
Yes.
Okay. And please interrupt me if I'm going too quickly. I know we just have a lot on here. We have 5 pages, so I want to move through, but obviously have discussion as appropriate. Second is, does the city want to allow any property owner to obtain short-term rental permits? Do they need to go through the process of obtaining permits? So if the answer is no, who is permitted to obtain short-term rental permits? The current draft of local law only allows property owners to obtain short-term rental permits for properties, and again, not tenants. And then we talk about if the answer is yes, then do you want to base any restrictions based upon the owner status? And so maybe we should go through a couple of these, Mayor, just to, because I think they'll lead to the discussion. If we turn the page on number 2, if any property owner can obtain a short-term rental permit, regardless of whether it is owner occupied, does the city want to set restrictions based on whether a unit is owner occupied or not owner occupied? I think we
so
decided
tell
it
us
has
where
to be
you're
owner
going. I
occupied.
can't quite follow that.
Yeah, no, I think this one's, you said it's owner occupied, so this one's not applicable. I apologize. So the next one is, must the tenant obtain approval from the landlord? Do you want, and then here we're back to the question. Okay, so do you want to allow tenants to be able to lease their apartments or the space that they've rented? Or is it only the actual true owners of the property?
Yeah,
I think that, go ahead, Jody.
I was gonna say I would be okay with renters doing it, but I also think that maybe there should be approval from the property owner as well as part of the application process.
Yeah, I agree. I think that if you require some kind of approval from the property owner, then you mitigate the issue that Councilperson Mansfield raised around taking rental units off of the market, because you're inherently, this is the place you live most of the time, and you're getting kind of approval for while you're away or something to do a short-term rental. So I'm comfortable with this approach for those reasons.
I agree.
Yep, so do I.
Okay. Next one is, can corporations register short-term rental units? So under the draft local law, corporations, limited liability companies, partnerships, etc., could not apply for a short-term rental permit. And the reason there is, how do you determine if it's owner occupied, if it's owned by a corporation?
Absolutely.
Yes.
And
Well,
okay,
So let me go through a couple of examples,
Yep.
though. So if you put your home in a trust, which some people do, that would be a non-person who owns it. I think it would be easy to demonstrate that the trust is for the benefit of the people who live there. So I think we could readily accommodate a trust situation. Nick, that makes sense to you legally?
it does with some caveats, but yes, we can, because depending upon the terms of a trust that sets forth who can live in the property. But you're correct. If someone's doing a trust for estate planning purposes, and so Lee, I have to give it some more thought, but I agree with the concept. Yeah. So if a husband and wife are put a property into a trust for estate planning purposes, that works and makes sense, as opposed for being put into a trust maybe for a guardianship purpose where the trustees are not the actual occupiers of the property. But
Yeah.
that is different than a corporation. So I think that's something we can carve out and work with.
Okay. Then I think the other one we could work with, and let me raise this, is the LLC concept, right? So if somebody does an LLC, it's probably unlikely to be done for their house, but if for some reason they do, if they wanted to demonstrate the ownership of the LLC, and demonstrate that those are the parties living there, I think that would be okay.
The difficulty there is that there's no public document that shows who the members of the LLC are. They would also have to disclose that.
Yep.
You'd have to see the corporate documents. And what if it's, you know, held one by an investor and one by someone who lives there? Does that requirement meet, or do all members of the corporation need to live on the property?
I say we leave it to the building department to make a determination whether it's sufficient rather than try to get into it. I don't think we're going to have a lot of these. I think the trust one, we will probably have a few of those.
I mean, so long as we can trace it to one responsible entity, you know, or person, I think that's the goal, whether it's a trust or LLC. Certainly not a corporation, but I think a trust and LLC, so long as it's traceable to someone.
Yeah, I'm going the same direction.
What if you have an LLC where someone is made a 1% owner of the LLC just for the purpose of placing someone into that unit?
So
That's come up before.
It has, and that's
my main issue with what we're trying to do here is to not take, you know, like George mentioned, is to not take units off of the housing market. So as far as I'm concerned, if someone is living in it the majority of the time, even if they own 1% of the corporation for whatever reason they're using for that person to live in it, as long as they're living in it for most of the year and they're only renting it out when they go on vacations, or they're only renting out one room for supplemental income or whatever it is, that's really my main issue. So I feel like we can kind of, I'm okay with the other part as long as we make sure that that part's there.
And the other part to the owner occupied argument is there's a responsible individual that is on the property at all times, and that can be contacted, and either it's going to be that person, or later on in the 5-page thing that we have in front of us, it also says that maybe someone could provide, if they can't be there overnight, there'd be a someone to be there in their stead. But, you know, so those are the two arguments, both taking it off the market, also having responsible person if someone throws a keg party or something like that, or there's a rabid dog or something.
Yeah, I think the responsible person part is going to be a good business model for some people in Beacon, because I think most people do this for when they go away. So
yeah,
there's a good job to be had there.
So is there interest in the LLC concept? With the
if we could still find it's so long as there's still an individual that could be traced to, that there, it's not just some corporate name, but there's a person and a contact number that's living there, I'd be happy with that.
Gotcha. So as long as the LLC meets the intent and the same requirement of having an owner occupied, then you're okay with it.
Yes.
Just realizing then that if you allow an LLC, it's the same as allowing an association, a partnership, or a corporation. But again, if your main concern is just to make sure the owner actually lives there and that they are a true owner, we can work around that.
Yeah.
Okay. The next one is, does the city wish to allow short-term rentals in multifamily homes or buildings? Under the prior draft law that was debated, the short-term rentals were not allowed in multifamily homes or buildings.
So my feeling on this, and again, it's pretty much the same thing. I'm okay with somebody. Well, see, even what I was about to say was I'm okay with somebody doing an Airbnb in a multifamily dwelling as long as somebody lives there and they're not using a unit solely for the purpose of Airbnb. But as the words were coming out of my mouth, I'm thinking about it, and I don't know how fair that is to the people in the other apartments in the multifamily dwelling. So I don't know how I feel about it.
I mean, it's solely a policy decision. I think the point John Clark made at the last one was about it then is shared use of common spaces, I think is where part of the discussion should focus on. That's how use of a multifamily for a short-term rental is different than a single-family home.
My gut reaction is no. I mean, and I think it will have an impact on the market when these buildings, these multifamily homes are designed to accommodate or fill a need in our community for rental units. And I think it's different than doing it in a single family or a two-family house.
And I think it's a quality of life issue also. I mean, if I live in a multifamily home and there's a constant stream of strangers coming in and out, it's gonna not, I'm not gonna feel comfortable. So, I mean, that's just a bare, brass tacks approach to it. I just think that it's not appropriate. That's just me.
I know I'm outweighed on this one, but I feel uncomfortable with drawing a distinction between what a renter is allowed to do. And it just generally makes me uncomfortable. I think that renters should be treated equally.
I agree with that completely. And if a renter is renting a home, then I think that they should still be able to do it. But I think even if it's the owner that wants to Airbnb part of a multifamily home, I just think that adds a different element to it.
Okay, so we just need direction. If I'm understanding it correctly, it appears the consensus is not to allow short-term rentals in multifamily homes, but please correct me if I've misstated it.
Yeah, let me weigh in. I was thinking to allow one per building, or or some fraction, but not all of it. But with the rest of the council, it says the right number is 0 as opposed to 1. Obviously that's okay too.
I vote 0.
I'm gonna go with 0.
Yeah, I know this will upset some people, but I think, yeah, I'm gonna vote 0 too.
I think we should just, and Amber, you're good with that? I'm assuming 0?
Oh, no, I completely disagree with this, but I'm outweighed here, so.
Oh, where are you? I'm sorry.
I think we should allow it.
By the apartment owner or manager, or by the tenant of a tenancy that they have?
Well, by a tenant with permission from the owner, as already agreed, or if it's a building that's owned by the owner.
Okay.
No, if it's like a condo or something, then the person that owns the condo would have the same, privileges as somebody in a single family.
Yeah, I think a condo owner should have the same position as a homeowner, as long as it's their primary residence. I think that a condo would not be considered a multifamily home.
I would think not, right? We'd make sure it's not.
Right. Okay.
So the council will have an opportunity, because you don't have all council members, you have 2 who are not here. We're going to draft a local law. You'll have the opportunity to engage in a discussion again if you wish to or wish not to, and certainly it will be discussed at the council public hearing.
Right, but you're using these questions to construct a statute, an ordinance, rather than write something that we're going to change or have trouble reading because it's long and complicated.
Right. Well, on this issue where it's 3-2, with 2 not here, we'll, I guess, unless directed otherwise, we'll write it with following the votes of 3 and then see what happens.
Well, so let me engage Amber for a moment. So on the assumption that if the unit is owned in the sense of a condo unit, that would be treated as a owner-occupied residential unit, which the owner-occupied could do a short-term rental. If we're now only talking about like apartment buildings that are all rental units without any owners, any view on that, Amber?
My lean would be to allow it with approval from the whomever they're leasing from.
In other words, the tenant could do the short-term rental, not the apartment manager.
Right.
Okay, that sounds
Again,
like,
it's just a level of discomfort with drawing a distinction between renters and owners. I'm fundamentally uncomfortable with that.
One suggestion is that you might consider a distinction between multifamily that has common hallways and one that has separate entrances, even condos. If a condo is in a multifamily building with common hallways, elevators, security entrances, and those sorts of things, it's much more an infringement on the neighbors if they have to share all those common aspects with strangers on a relatively frequent basis. Whereas if it's a townhouse or something that has separate entrances, then it's not as much as a disruption.
Yeah. And I mean, look, we're only on page 2 and it's 9:15 and I'm clearly outweighed here. So I'm okay moving on. Like I've registered my dissent. I've said why I dissent and we can move on.
okay.
Okay, so then, excuse me, my headset went out on me. So the next question is the zoning districts. The draft local law only allows short-term rentals as an accessory use in single-family homes and residential districts. Do you want to allow it in all zoning districts or just in residential districts?
I kind of feel like residential should be the most restrictive. So if it's allowed in residential, I don't see why it shouldn't be allowed in other districts. Just my opinion.
That's a good point. Is there an argument for limiting it?
I don't
I-
have one.
I think the bulk of the residential units in a non-residential district is Main Street.
There's also all the lofts out on 52.
Right. Oh, so FCD, Fishkill Creek Zone.
Yeah.
Linkage, RTOD.
So what is the direction?
I agree with Councilperson Macreado. I don't see a reason to, if it's allowed in residential and that's kind of our most restrictive, then just allow it.
Agreed.
Same.
I'm sorry, my headset switched over there. So to leave it or to allow it in other districts?
All districts.
Okay. Thank you. The next one on the top of page 3 is, do you wish the property owner, does the property owner need to be on site when the short-term rental unit is rented? As an example, the village of Rhinebeck requires an owner leaving Dutchess County overnight during the rental period to engage the services of an agent with the right to enter and maintain possession of a dwelling. This agent must be available 24 hours a day to respond to tenant and neighborhood concerns and be capable of responding within 2 hours of notification from the village. So that was the question when you say, it's owner occupied, is it okay for the property owner to be out of the premises and not there for the weekend when it's rented? Or do they need to be living on site and they're only renting out a bedroom of the unit and not the entire unit?
Yeah, I think we touched on
I
that
think
earlier when, sorry, Amber.
I was just gonna say, I mean, I think that it's okay for them to not be present, but I think that this should be required. I don't know if an agent means like a professional service, like a property manager, but in general, there should be somebody that is accessible per these requirements that can deal with the house if something happens, the house or the property.
So, but imagine this, like say someone buys a house and they never live there. They have a manager that lives around the block. then that house could be rented out all the time as a Airbnb?
Well, the point is that
Well,
they
I guess
have,
go ahead.
Amber?
well, that, I mean, that's the whole point of what we're doing here. They have to live there. There's no question about that. But if they go on vacation for a couple of weeks and they want to rent it out, then there needs to be a point person, but it has
But
to be their primary residence.
But that's time limited. So that's what I'm trying to get to, is maybe there should be a time limit as to how many nights of the month or whatever. They can still call it a prime residence. Someone might use that property as their prime residence, but they may not even live there 6 months out of the year.
Right, I think we had, I feel like I have 180 days in my head. I feel like we had discussed that the first time around on this. Yeah, I think there should be a limit. Maybe 2 limits. Maybe if you're renting out your entire property, there should be a limit on how many nights you're do that. And if you're renting out a room, the limit could be adjusted or maybe even removed.
Yeah, we just got to be careful about who's going to be counting all those dates that people are gone and, keeping track of all that, I mean, I agree with you saying.
Doing a pretty good job of monitoring it, it seems. I just read an article about that I should send to you guys.
Who's doing it?
Boston.
Oh.
Yeah, that is one issue I've been thinking about with this list, is whether we distinguish between people renting a room in a residence where they're still there, as opposed to renting the entire residence. And we may be more willing to allow kind of unlimited rental of a room, as since you're still living in it, you're just renting out a room, as opposed to the whole residence.
Mm-hmm.
One might have a day limit. I think that, Jody, that's what you were saying, right?
So I'm not sure I have clear direction on this one, though.
So I think we went off the reservation. I think your question was about, do they need to be on site? And I think where you were going was, if they're off site, they need to identify somebody. I think we would agree with that part. I think the part we were debating was whether you're renting a room or whether you're renting the whole house, right?
Right.
Yeah, and how many times a year are you doing it possibly?
Right.
And that becomes a
Let me
difficult
throw
part
another one at us.
from an enforcement standpoint.
To count the number of days?
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm wondering is there any way that municipalities could, well, it's not just Airbnb though, because there are other sites that you can use, I guess.
So let me ask this. Would we want to, do we want to regulate somebody renting out a room on a short-term basis?
As
I
opposed to.
think in that instance,
But that would be permitted.
I get where you're going though, Mayor. I think in that instance, I'm not as concerned because I don't see that as a substitute for a rental unit, right?
Yeah. So if we allow short-term rentals as an accessory use, maybe we apply a kind of very limited requirements if you're only renting a room and you're otherwise being there the whole time. And that the more stringent requirements would apply when you're trying to rent the whole place.
I think that's the goal, yeah.
I would agree.
And we also might put a de minimis number on it, like, I'm away for, 2 weeks of vacation in wherever I'm going. And, I rent it out for that time and I'm not there. Maybe that should be all right as well. I don't know.
I think that's all right. I mean, it's overreach at that point if you're going to do that. I think it's fine.
Okay, so we'll make that distinction between renting out a partial portion of the home versus renting out the entire house.
Yes.
And then we'll come back to you with some specific language.
Yep.
The next one then is.
Yeah, we
had
haven't
a
sorted out a-
discussion- I'm sorry, Mayor.
Go ahead, Nick.
The next discussion was about accessory apartments. Did you want to allow someone to turn an accessory apartment into a short-term rental? And noting that an accessory apartment could be located within the house, or it could be a detached structure.
I don't have a problem with
I
that.
guess
I don't have a problem with it either.
That does remove a rental unit from the marketplace, though. Most of the accessory apartments that have been approved, I'm not sure, I can't remember, but I think there might have been a restriction or a condition that they can't be used as Airbnb because the idea was to create an accessory affordable housing unit.
I think they were all, part of the intention of the accessory apartment is also to subsidize possibly the people that are living in the house for additional, whether it be rental or Airbnb. I think that's part of it, as opposed to, I mean, certainly part of it is adding to the housing stock, but part of it is adding, an elderly couple that their budget is based on their taxes and they need to either sell their house or get some more income. I think that would, whether it's an Airbnb or a rented unit, would achieve the same goal.
Well, I think
I would push this back to the same question about occupied. If they occupy the accessory apartment, then that can be their short-term rental. If they occupy the primary residence on the dwelling, then that's their short-term rental, but I don't think you get to do both.
Yeah, it does go to the issue of, I mean, if I have an accessory apartment and I need income for my, property, obviously I rent it out on a long-term lease. I may not make as much as I would on a short-term rental. Well, I might make a more consistent income, right? Because I've got a lease there.
But it's not that much different than a two-family dwelling, which we've already agreed is allowable. Right?
Well, I think where Amber was going was to say, if you're living in that one unit.
Yeah, but the only distinction between that and what we've already agreed would be allowable in a two-family unit, Airbnb is allowed. It's kind of the same thing, except possibly they might be two separate structures. You know what I mean?
Well, I think, and this is to Amber's point, in a two-family unit, you have two families living in it. So if one of the families wants to rent that unit out for an Airbnb, then I hope that's what we had decided, then that would be okay. I don't want a two-family unit where an owner lives in one unit and then the other unit is purely Airbnb. I think that kind of goes against the spirit of what we're trying to do.
I think we did that. I agree. I agree. There's some concern, but I think that's what we've initially agreed on, that they could do that in a two-family unit.
Sorry, now I'm going back to page 1.
So I'm not sure I'm hearing clear direction on the accessory apartments. And as the discussion has borne out, there are two types of accessory apartments, those contained within a dwelling unit and those that are a separate standalone accessory apartment.
Yeah, I don't think it's of consequence, which is which. What I hear people kind of working their way through is the issue of if I allow an entire unit that is otherwise unoccupied to go to short-term rental, am I taking something off the rental market? And, I think the short answer is yes. Doesn't matter whether it's an accessory apartment or an empty home or a unit in an apartment building, you're taking a unit off the rental market.
Right, and just going back to that previous conversation, because I want to be clear on what we agreed on, I thought we were discussing whether a single family or a two-family owner occupied, if that would be the definition of owner occupied, which I was okay with, but I still feel like the person renting out the Airbnb has to live in the unit that they're renting out. So you wouldn't have a two-family house and one of the apartments in the two-family house was a constant Airbnb. I think it should always be primarily to be lived in.
I agree with Jody on that one. I mean,
You don't sound so surprised about it.
what's that? No, I think that the two main principles that based on the answers to every single one of these questions is, does it have an impact on the market? And does it have the potential to impact the quality of life of the community in terms of ways? And so those are, if we keep going back to those, all our answers should be clear enough in a way, you know? But those are the two things for me that guide whatever decision I make in these questions.
Yeah, that's exactly where I'm at.
So what is then this consensus of the council with respect to accessory apartments?
I would say, like what Amber had mentioned, if they're living in the accessory apartment, then they could apply to have an Airbnb in the accessory apartment. If they're living in the main house, then they would have to have it in the main house.
Okay, so only by the owner occupier.
Yeah.
One way you can accomplish that is put a limit on the number of days that it can be rented out, so that there's always a primary residence in there and they're renting it out for 50 or 60 days or whatever number you put on it, less than half a year. That way you always assume that the residence is a primary, there's a primary resident there. And this is a sideline business rather than somebody buying a two-family house and renting out one side every weekend.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Okay. Next question, Councilmember Amar Blair had asked a question whether the city should be regulating whether pets are permitted.
So
we just need to know, is that something the city council wishes to regulate with respect to short-term rentals?
No, I mean, I think it's up to the individual owner of the property. I don't think it's any of our business.
So one issue the city clerk had is how this would be handled, because right now, so dogs have to be registered. So how would we handle that? And if there was a complaint, so there were some concerns on that, right? So we had our dog warden or complaints are responded to by the police. Other pets don't have to be registered, but dogs do. So we were just, why would one be treated differently than the other?
Because they're visitors. Every dog that visits Beacon doesn't have to be registered.
Right.
Okay. Yeah, so if the dog, and again, I'm just focusing on the dog because that's what we register, right? So they get out and bite somebody, we would just follow, would we cite them for not having a non-registered dog and then just walk them through the process?
Well,
I know I'm getting down into the weeds, but we have to, so we have to work through how it's handled every day. So we're just trying to bring up the situation.
What happens now if a hiker comes into the city and climbs the mountain, comes down, the dog bites someone? We don't cite them.
I'd have to, that's a good question. Let me find out how that would happen. Let me see if we've ever had that situation.
Right, permit's only required if the owner is a resident of the city.
yeah, so we can't cite them for not having a permit if we're not asking them to get a permit.
Right.
Okay.
Next question is, Councilmember Nelson had raised this concept. Does the city want to set up a distance requirements between short-term rentals? Similar to what some municipalities have with certain uses, like gas stations can only be located within X hundred feet of another gas station, churches from liquor stores, something of that nature.
Yeah, I think this is important. I think there are certain neighborhoods that are becoming overrun.
And there is in this notes below what the Village of Rhinebeck does, states that no short-term rental permit may be allowed for any lot located within 2 lots from a lot where a current permit has been issued from a public lottery draw.
And that raises a question for me, like how do you, is it just whoever gets to the clerk windows first gets their permit? How do you make sure this is done fairly? Does this mean we have to have a lottery for permits?
Right. I mean, I haven't looked at that, how it would be implemented. If the council is interested in it, we'll go ahead and look at that. I have not taken the time to do that yet.
It seems like a bureaucratic nightmare.
Yeah, I was looking at this issue for the purpose of limiting the total number of rental units that are being removed from the market by short-term rentals. But I think we're picking that up another way. We're basically saying, if it's an accessory apartment that you're not living in, you can't short-term rental it. If it's a unit that you don't live in, you can't short-term rental it. So this, if we're not taking any units off of the apartment rolls, or the rental rolls, I kind of don't have a problem with the number of homeowners who are either renting out a room or occasionally renting out their own home. So I would, sorry, go ahead.
I think it goes to, if we're controlling the quality of life now, where there's someone there and responsible and overseeing these rentals, then I think the proximity to one another will be less of a concern, so long as, there's responsible people that could be contacted if something happens. So I think the volume of the places doesn't matter. It's the quality of the thing, of the units or the visitors, I think, that can be monitored by the hosts.
I originally got this idea from there's a community in San Luis Obispo, California, that actually had the distance requirements, and that's actually written into their law. I don't have it in front of me, but it may be something you might want to look at, or I can find it, or I can pass it
Yeah, no, we
along.
can certainly look for it.
So if you pull that one, just check to see whether they allow a non-owner occupied, short-term rental, right?
Understood, yes. Yep. Okay, so we'll come back to that when we get an answer. Should note.
If you're going to do it by distance, I think it should be.
Sorry, John.
I was going to say, if you're going to do it, I would do it by foot distance rather than lot, because lots are all variable sizes in the village, and it just doesn't seem fair to do it by lots, adjacent lots.
I think in San Luis Obispo there is a foot distance, not a lot distance.
Right.
But I don't want to dwell on this for too long, but what is the goal of doing this?
So you don't have concentrations, that you have them scattered around the city so that no one neighbor has 3 or 4 of them right around them.
So I also,
Right, but I think it's less of an issue when it's owner occupied. Like it's not like you're undermining the integrity of the community, of the neighborhood.
Well, if you look at worst case scenario, everybody thinks of this as being, well, it's just going away from vacation for 2 weeks. But the real people who are abusing the system in this sense are people who live here 6 months out of the year and go away for 6 months out of the year. And they rent out their place constantly while they're gone.
Right.
They're still primary owners, but they have 6 months worth of steady rentals. And if you have a cluster of those, you feel like you're living in a neighborhood of transients. That's the argument.
so then maybe what it comes down to, and that's also another enforcement issue, but if we are able to figure out a way to put a limit on the number of days that somebody's able to rent out their space or whatever it is, then I'd be, then I'd feel a little bit better about allowing more of them on a block. Because if it's just like 5 neighbors on a block that all want to rent out their house for the couple of weeks that they go on vacation, then that's not really a big deal.
Right. I think the number of days is more effective than the spatial restriction, because that gets into who comes first and that sort of thing.
I agree.
And the way they normally deal with number of days is that they have to keep records and submit the records to the building inspector on the annual inspection, and he can see how many days they rented it out. And if he wants to, he can check against the listings.
That sounds reasonable.
Yeah, that sounds
Okay, and we're going to get to some of those at the end about whether you should limit the number of days. So it sounds like there's not interest in setting the distance requirements, but the concern is going to be addressed by discussion later on. So should notice be provided to adjoining property owners when a short-term rental permit is submitted? If you turn over to page 4, for example, the Village of Rhinebeck, notice of a short-term rental application is given to property owners within 250 feet. Now, there's no public hearing. They don't have an opportunity to object to its issuance. It's just to put them on notice that a property has been placed as a short-term rental.
Yeah, that's something I would want to know.
Anyone disagree?
I don't have any strong feelings either way, so whatever the consensus is.
Yeah, I lean in the direction George is going, which is if we're limiting it to owner occupied, I would be willing to have many fewer issues like this notice piece, right? Because, yeah, John's example, I'm gone 6 months a year, but generally speaking, if that's where we're heading, I don't think we need a lot of these other bits.
I agree.
Yeah, same here. I agree.
Okay, so that would then mean no notice to property owners, correct?
Correct.
Right, we
Okay.
could maintain a list of them and put it on our website. That would be easy. Then you can just see it that way.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Okay, good, noted. Next question is, does the city want to establish a maximum number of occupants per dwelling or a maximum number per bedroom? And then you'll see there are 3 examples. Rhinebeck, no more than 6 occupants as lodgers at any given time with a maximum of 2 occupants per bedroom. Woodstock, the town board sets cap on the number of both owner-occupied short-term rentals and non-owner-occupied short-term rentals permitted overall. And in the town of Cornwall, no more than 3 adult persons can occupy 1 bedroom.
I think that's completely impossible to enforce.
Right, and if we're doing owner occupied, I'm not letting 3 people into one of my bedrooms. Like, stop it already. Right?
Okay.
It's all
Yeah,
about
I think we can,
Move on.
Yes.
yeah,
The
this doesn't seem
intention of this, I
necessary.
know it's hard to enforce, but the intention is to eliminate the party house option where you rent it out, a whole house to 20 people. And if you don't have this in, when they do it, you can't pull their permit because they haven't actually violated the terms of the permit.
They can still just rent the house under 3 people and say that they invited all of their friends over.
Party.
Yeah.
But the option, I think the idea
Come
is
back and-
you can document that they're doing this by a complaint, and then you could pull their permit and say, you know, they're not living up to the standards of the permit.
Well, but I feel like that doesn't always necessarily end up on the owner. I mean, I know that it's happened in hotels. If they charge per person, people say, well, we're only going to have 2 people because they know that nobody's going to notice the 6 friends that they bring in, you know? So if you're renting it under 3 people and then 10 people show up and the owner, you know, in good faith thought that they were renting it to 3 people, I feel like that's not something that you can really put on the Airbnb owner. It's just my opinion.
I just think it's totally unenforceable. You know, I don't see how we can follow up on that.
Yeah, but sometimes it's not about enforcing it. It's I think it's what John is saying is that you have the opportunity to revoke someone's
Permit.
permit.
But if someone lodges a complaint, you know, that takes care of that, doesn't it? I mean, if you're in violation, you know, I don't know, do you get 1 warning and then is it a 3 strike, you're out kind of thing?
But a complaint because it's too loud or something like that it wouldn't be enough to, maybe it's, you know, an accumulation of complaints. We could draw, you know, some sort of map of that, but.
Yeah, but
you know,
Well, but would you want to revoke a permit because they rented it to too many people one time? Especially if they didn't necessarily know that they were renting it to too many people? I feel like there's so much of this that's out of the person's hands that it wouldn't be fair to revoke their permit over it.
So Nick, there's an issue here, which is revoking a permit. You'd have to be able to prove it.
I'm sorry, say that again, Lee?
When you have to be able to prove the violation in order to revoke a permit?
Yes, and there's also typically a hearing as well. You just can't say it's revoked. You got to give them an opportunity to be heard and challenge that accusation. So there is an evidentiary requirement of meeting a threshold establishing that they violated it. And the house party would also be addressed through a noise violation, but.
So anyway, listening to the attorney talk about how we would enforce this, I would not I would strike it. Right.
Okay,
And we could do it a different way, which is to say, if you get a noise complaint or something like that, that reported to the police, that would by itself be reason to revoke. So you don't have to prove anything, because once you get the complaint, the police have the complaint.
right, so let's look at the enforcement section when we get the law drafted.
All right. Yeah, that's a good idea.
Yeah.
That'll also get us through the list sooner.
Yes.
Yes. Does the city want to limit how many days in the year a property may be rented for?
Yes.
Rhinebeck limits it to 16 days. Other municipalities, I'm sure, are more liberal. Is there a magic number? And also note that Rhinebeck has that there must be a 7-day period of no rental activity between rentals. So that's a separate concept, which serves to limit the number of rentals. You then allow it, you know, it's a week on, a week off. So is there interest in limiting the number of days? If so, how many days? And is there interest in having forced breaks between rentals?
I like the gaps.
Whole
like
house rent, whole house rentals or renting of a room? Renting of a room, I've got no limit.
Yeah, I definitely think we need to make a distinction.
Yeah.
So it sounds like for, yeah, but renting of a room and the whole house is a good distinction.
Yeah.
Yes.
For a whole
So
house-
I'm getting the sense,
I was just
yep,
gonna say,
renting of a room unregulated.
Yes.
Okay. So if the whole house is rented, do you wish for there to be a gap between rental activities?
I like that.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, are we comfortable with the 7 days? So it's 1 week on, 1 week off?
We could try that. I mean, we can always change things too.
Yep, no, you have a public hearing, planning board comment.
Yeah, I would be comfortable with 5 days also if say one renter wanted a week and they wanted the weekend at the end of their week, and then the next renter wanted the weekend at the beginning of their week. I feel like if they, I don't know.
But yeah, then that means no rental Monday through Friday, but every Saturday and Sunday, but you would then be
Right, that's why I'm
affecting.
saying they would still have a week off, but it would only be 5 days as opposed to 7 days.
Mhm.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, we
I don't
just-
have very strong feelings about it one way or the other.
So, you know, we'll draft it with the 7 day and then we'll debate it in the next workshop when we discuss it, and then I'm sure the public will not be shy about speaking.
Yeah, I have less of a concern about the consecutive rental and more just a total number of days. I mean, if somebody's gone for the month of June, rent it for the month. I'm okay.
Yeah, I kind of feel that way too. Some people get a summer thing where they're away for the whole summer or something like that. And if they're only renting it for those 2 months over the summer.
But you could rent it for a month, so long as it wasn't 2 consecutive months, if there was a 7-day period in between them. Right?
Correct. That is the
Right,
intent
but-
that you,
Like if someone has an opportunity to be away for the whole summer and the only way that they can do it is by booking Airbnb rentals for the time that they're away, then they might not book the Airbnb rentals all year long because it's just where they live, but they just, you know, why not let them?
Right, right. Well, that would be an argument against having a total amount of days as opposed to a gap.
No, I think there should definitely be a total amount of days.
All right, so, well, we could just, yeah. But are you saying you want to allow people to do it for the entire summer?
I think so.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I think once we figure out the limit of days, then as long as it's within the limit, if they want to use all of their days over the summer, then yeah, I think I'm okay with that. But then if we use the limit of days in exchange for the distance limitation, then you can run into somebody who wants their kids playing outside over the summer and all of a sudden their entire neighborhood is full of strangers because all of their neighbors are Airbnb-ing their houses. So
Yeah.
I don't know.
God, I've almost forgotten about the epidemic.
Yeah. So maybe the easier discussion for now is the number of total days in the year you wish to limit it to.
Yeah. I think we're getting, there's like too many options here, Nick.
Yeah.
Yes. So how
Um,
many days a year? Is it half a year? 60 days?
180. How about that?
Yeah, I think 180 is what we had discussed previously.
Yeah, that
Yeah.
was the number we came up with last time we had this discussion. Many years ago.
Okay. Parking regulation for short-term rentals. The last law didn't do it. There was some discussion about whether you wanted to regulate parking or not regulate it and revisit the local law after a year and see what's working, what's not working.
I mean, I feel like people have to comply with general parking regulations. So just comply with the parking regulations that we already have.
Sounds simple.
Okay. Do you want a short-term rental unit to display a plaque or a sign on the property?
No,
I think
we'll
that's a
make-
security issue.
Yeah.
I don't agree with
Okay.
that at all.
And short-term rental permits renewed on an annual basis or some other time?
Well, if we were gonna do biennial inspection, then we probably could do it 2 years. Oh,
And
that's
then
what it
that
says.
also, yeah, but then I think just might keep that in mind with the enforcement mechanism. If you have a strong enforcement mechanism, then the number of years may not be as important.
Yeah.
I think that also depends on where we do end up. I mean, if we're definitely not going to put a limit on how many we're going to allow and how far apart we're going to make them, then I'm okay with making a longer period of time during the application process. But if we're going to say that there's a limit, then maybe a shorter application process so that if somebody else is trying to get in, they can make a case.
Understood. The last question, and it sounds like it's answered, do you want to establish a maximum number of short-term rental permits?
Not if we're not taking units off the rental market.
Right.
And if we're limiting the number of days.
Okay, well, unless you have more questions, want to revisit these questions or have me make up questions, we've gone through all the questions.
No, enough. Thank you, Nick.
So
That's
the next
interesting.
step, Mayor, would be for us to prepare a draft local law based upon tonight's discussion and then bring it back for a virtual workshop.
Okay. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see all the pieces put together because this is somewhat changed in direction from where we were before. Still going the same direction, but the one significant change is the council has raised a concern for not eliminating rental units from the rental housing market. And that's sort of most of the things that are different kind of run off that. So let's see how it all looks and we'll come back at it, right?
Yeah.
Okay. There's still another item on the table. We ready to go to ferry landing easements?
Yeah.
If you don't need me, I'm going to drop off.
Okay, safe commute.
Okay.
Thank you.
Nice seeing you all again.
Yeah.
Good. Thanks, John.
Bye,
So in
John.
your packet is a memo from our office talking about these easements. This is really a ministerial matter similar to other land use approvals that the council has done before, where the planning board approves a project. There are then approvals for easements for sideline, easements for drainage utilities. So that's what this is. The ferry landing project has 2 easements. One is a drainage easement for an existing drainage structure on their property. So we're legalizing and formalizing the city's infrastructure being located on their property. We strongly encourage you to act in favor of that one. The next is a site distance easement, which is an easement that goes on the property and requires them to maintain and prevent landscapes from growing above a certain height so as not to interfere with traffic and traffic sightline distances. So we would just have this on, we've looked at the agreements themselves and they've been approved as to form. And we would just ask that they be placed on your next agenda for approval.
Okay.
Sorry, my phone was slipping. So it looks like I was slipping.
Any questions, folks? I like these issues. Okay. That's it for our public
Mayor, we
agenda.
had, I'm sorry, Mayor, we had one other
Oh.
item that we put on late today.
Okay.
So it is
Fantastic.
on your agenda. This was, we had bid proposals for the Green Street playground equipment. So it was to furnish and install a new playground structure. Furnish and install approximately 21 square feet of board-in-place rubber surface for the playground, and also to furnish and install approximately 392 linear square feet of stabilized stone dust ADA accessible trail. So we had two bids. The low bid was Pettinelli Recreation Inc., and it was $107,025. And we had CDBG capital, so we had 2020 capital money, which was 35,000, CDBG funding, which was 60,000, and then we also had 2019 leftover CDBG money from the slip lining, which was 17,000. So that brings about 112,000. So it's certainly within budget.
It always gets me how different those amounts end up being. That's more than double.
So if you're all okay, we'd like to put this on for next week for a resolution so we can get started when we're allowed to.
I'm good.
Okay.
Thank you all.
I'm good.
I would just ask, just a lesson learned from the park stuff last year. Just try and provide some awareness to the public of like what the playground equipment will look like and that kind of thing. There were a lot of comments on the park changes, and there probably will be on this too. So just look for some opportunities to, let people know what's going on.
Good point.
All right. Good point.
I think that's the end of our public session. Do we have the ability to do something in executive session?
So that can be, Anthony, that can be accomplished by going to executive session stating that the board will not take any action and will adjourn without taking any further action. That way we can then just end the live feed and all of us would stay on Zoom. Or we can all get off of Zoom.
You're asking,
keep up.
okay. So you're all asking, do you want a motion? Is that what you're asking for, Nick?
Yes.
All right, so motion to go in executive session with a note that no action will be taken thereafter.
Motion.
Second.
And for the discussion of personnel and contracts, is that right, Anthony?
That is correct.
Okay. All right, all in favor?
Aye.
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 All right, I heard a